Hey guys, we're back with another podcast, and this is going to be a really good one. This is going to be with Tom Valenza, and Tom Valenza owns historiceyewearcompany.com. And if you get True West magazine, what started it was I kept seeing this post in the trading post part of True West magazine, and it would say Historic Eyewear company, and it gave his website, historiceyewearcompany.com, and he had some blue lens glasses, and I'm like, man, I wear glasses, so I'm thinking to myself, man, what's the history of eyewear during the 1800s? And come to find out, Tom is a historian, so it made a perfect fit, and I think you guys are going to love his story. And of course, as always, I want to thank the folks over at the Tombstone Epitaph, Arizona's longest running newspaper. If you want to feel a part of history and have Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp and all the people down in Tombstone brought right to your home, because remember, they read the same newspaper too, then you want to get the Tombstone Epitaph at tombstoneepitaph.com. Subscriptions are super reasonable. They're like $60 for 3 years or $25 for 1 year. You really want to do the 3 year because you're going to save a lot of money, and then you don't have to worry about a subscription every year. And they'll deliver it right to your door, and it's a true newspaper. And in every paper, you're going to get Bob Bosbell and his wonderful artwork in the center section. So check out tombstoneepitaph.com. I also want to thank the folks at Wild West History Association. I'm a member. We have Roundup coming up in Deadwood, and I can't wait. It's going to be in July. And if you want to learn more about being a member of the Wild West History Association, go on wildwesthistory.org. And again, they do wonderful things. You get the journal. It's 100 plus pages. It's actually a book with no commercials. So you don't see ads in there. You don't see, things for makeup or cars or stereo systems or whatever it is. And it's just 100 plus pages of true research provenance. And you guys are going to love it. And that is wildwesthistory.org. So Tom kind of came to me by mistake because I was looking in the trading post, like I said, in True West magazine, and I'm a maniac of True West magazine, which means I get True West magazine for life. I think it's $250, and you become a maniac member, and you get True West magazine for life, and you can do that at truewestmagazine.com. But in the very back of the trading post was this ad for Historic Eyewear, and I was like, man, I got to learn more about this. So I called the number, and Tom answered, and found out that there's a lot more to Tom than just eyewear. And we're going to talk to Tom. And again, if you want to know about what he's doing, you can find his website, his company website, at historiceyewearcompany.com. So, hey, Tom, how you doing, bud?
Good morning, Mike.
So how did you become an historic eyewear professional, historian, researcher? Because you're from the East Coast, correct?
That's correct. New Jersey.
New Jersey. So tell us your story of how a man from New Jersey ends up in Arizona and making eyewear, historic eyewear.
Well, my parents were opticians, both my mother and father, and I became an optician at the age of 21. And at the time, you had to do on-the-job training and education and testing. So as an optician now, you're always interested in eyeglasses. And one day at the shop, we used to have what we would call a part spin. And what we would do is sometimes we would do a lot of repairs, hinge repairs and temple replacements. And often if parts weren't available, we'd go to our part spin. And one day I was going through the part spin, and there was these, mostly at the time it was in the, let me think here, in the early 1970s. And most of the eyeglasses were these heavy black plastic type frames. Picture something that maybe Roy Orbison or Buddy Holly would wear, or cat's eyes bejeweled with rhinestones. And I found this one little lens. The glass was perfectly flat. It was tiny and had a very thin gold rim and a beautifully detailed joint or end piece on it. So I asked my father, I said, what is this? He said, it's an antique eyeglass. part of an antique eyeglass. So anyway, that piqued my interest. And so what I started to do was collect antique eyeglasses. This is way before you can go online, before eBay and internet or whatever. So on Saturday afternoons, we would work till 1:00, and Saturday afternoons I would visit local antique stores. And I started a collection of antique eyeglasses, and after a period of time, I knew they were antique eyeglasses, but I needed to know more, like different time periods and when they were made, where they were made. So I started to do more research, and I got a pretty terrific book by Richard Corson, Fashions in Eyeglasses, and that really helped a lot. And then my interest just continued from there, and my collection grew, and that's how I got started in this antique eyeglass, my interest in antique eyeglasses.
But as your interest grew, there was a decision. Did you always live in the East Coast? Have you slowly come west? Or did you guys come out to Tucson and go, oh my God, this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen?
We visited several years ago. I think it was in the late 90s. We just came out for a vacation because I had never been out west. And we fell in love with it. I just came to the Arizona, Tucson area, and I felt like I was at home. And after dealing with the New Jersey weather and crowds and whatever for over 60 years, we thought we purchased a piece of property thinking that someday we're going to retire out here. And then 5 years ago, we finally made the decision to do it. Before we get too old, I said, let's do it now. We're never going to do it. Mm-hmm. So, but I always had an interest in history. Cowboys, I grew up watching cowboy shows on television in the 50s. God, there were so many of them. So when I would watch TV, or often we go to these different reenactments and historical events, I started to notice eyeglasses, and more often than not, they were wearing incorrect eyeglasses. I remember seeing a movie it was about Frank James in his older years, and I think it was around circa 1890, and he's wearing a pair of spectacles. And I said, God, I just worked on a pair of those the other day. And I did some research, and I found out they weren't available until 1938. But there's Frank James wearing them in 1790. So it just convinced me that there was possibly a little specialty market for education and for spectacles that were period correct. And typically the originals were difficult to work on and hard to find. And so I decided with my wife that this might be a little specialty market maybe we can get involved in, and so I can celebrate my love of history and combine it with my profession. And that's what we did. We started in actually 2004, and we got a lot of rejections, and it was really tough to get started. But by 2010, we were in business, and we made our first sale in 2010.
But it's more than a specialty market, because as I researched you, you're everywhere where historic eyewear is important, because it's you're on the internet, you've written papers, you're more than just a little niche market with your wife. Like, there's more about you. So are you an optician by trade?
Yes, optician by trade. That's correct.
And so in the 1800s, when you and I spoke on a pre-interview, I was fascinated because how did they, it's so dumb, but how did they take and measure glasses in the 1800s? Because when I go and get fitted for my contacts and glasses, I've got this big machine, and we all know it. You put this big thing, and the doctor goes, now, better, worse, or 1 or 2, and you have to go 2. And then he zeroes it in, and then I don't know how, it's like magic, poof, there's your lens. They didn't have that in the 1800s. So how were glasses made, and how did an optician dial in to where a person needed glasses and was able to actually make the correct prescription?
Okay, that's a good question, actually. What they would do is typically you would have what they would call a spectacle peddler, and he would have several pair of eyeglasses with different focal lengths. And a person would just try on several pair, and then after trying on a few different pair, they say, well, this one seems to work the best, and that was sort of how they made their decision. Just trial and error. As that was right up until the early 1800s. And then it got to a point where during the 1800s, you could go into a hardware store, and it was the same process. You try on several pair. But if you live in the larger cities like New York or Boston or Philadelphia, there you can actually go to an oculist and have your eyes examined, much in the same way they do today without all this sophisticated machinery, just different sets of trial lenses, and they can dial in and focus and get you, a little bit more precise prescription for your needs. But basically, it was mostly trial and error.
Okay, so I'm going to refine my question. The process of making a lens, let's go, in the 1800s, how did they make a lens? Because they were mostly, I'm going to assume, a flat lens, where today, you can get curved lenses and things like that. So how did they make how did they actually make the lenses?
Well, they would have, most of the lenses up until about 1880 were imported from Europe. And what they would do is they would have it's called a lap machine. You'd have a convex surface, and then the glass would go in the convex surface, and then you would have a concave surface, and it would be a slow process of polishing. So these lenses, prescription lenses, did have curvature to them. And they would either be plano-convex, which would be a flat side and then a curved side in the front, or they would be plano-concave, where there were the curved sides inward on the front and the back of the lens. And then they also had colored glass. Typically, colored glass was a flat lens, like a window pane. And it would be made in sheets, and different oxides would be added to the molten glass, and that would give it the color. And once the glass hardened, it would be cut in 2-inch squares or whatever, and then it could be sent to opticians or spectacle makers, and then they can cut it to size and shape to fit the frames.
So this is going on because you mentioned in your website, and if you guys want to find out about what Tom does, if you go on the internet and type in the word history on your face, a history on your face, his website will show up as historiceyewearcompany.com. Click on that link and you can find out more about what we're talking about. And again, it's called History on Your Face, and then tap on the link to historiceyewearcompany.com, and you can read all about what Tom and I are talking about. There was you mentioned in an article that, back to when you said about how they gave glasses, they actually had glasses on a trial period. Like you could go in and get them and wear them for weeks on end, and then go back and say, no, that's not right. And then go get another pair and then stay a few weeks. And then, yeah, that's not right. Was that real? I mean, could you try on glasses like we try on a car and test drive them for a while?
Yes, typically in the cities you can do that. The opticians would offer this as a benefit if you purchase their spectacles. So you can try them, and if it didn't work out, you can return them and try a different pair with a different focal length or a different power or whatever. But of course, if you bought your spectacles from a spectacle peddler who was in town one day and gone the next day, then you were out of luck. But yeah, that did happen. Yep.
When the Civil War came, there were different styles and frames throughout the 1800s, starting really, I think, around the Civil War is what you mentioned. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I hope you do. Around the Civil War, and then as the 1800s progressed, there were different styles of frames. And you could have had things like lens shapes, including oval, oblong, octagon, and then the frames obviously followed suit. What were some of the frame styles during the 1800s, starting at around, I think around the Civil War period, all the way up to the 1880s, to where you mentioned that frameless became really popular?
Yeah. Well, probably the most common style or shape was an oval shape. And then, of course, there was an oblong, which is a rectangular with rounded corners. And some had square corners that were very rectangular, while others had rounded. And then the octagon shape was also popular. And during the Civil War period, these were the most popular shapes. And probably, I think it was around maybe 1840 or so, rimless style, where the lenses were drilled and mounted to the bridge with screws, and then the end piece joints with the temples connected were drilled and also mounted. But these slowly got more popular over a period of time, and it wasn't until really about 1870 when you start to see these, what we call rimless. Back then they called them frameless styles.
Okay. Can I get you real quickly? Speak up a little bit.
Yes.
There you go. Fading back on me. So the lenses, and just so you know, folks, I don't edit anything. So Tom and I are live, and sometimes that happens. The eyeglass costs, because people didn't make a lot of money back then during that period. Were eyeglasses expensive?
Well, I guess it's all relative, but you can buy a steel frame or a blued steel frame, and even some brass frames for about 50 cents. In today's dollars, I don't know what that would be. And then if you wanted a higher quality frame, coin silver, with what they would refer to as the best optics, you could spend up to $1.70. And there were some German brass frames made at the time. They were brass and not coin silver. Give me a second here. Well, anyway, they were mostly brass frames and German silver, which was an alloy that looked like silver, wasn't. And they can be purchased for less than 50 cents a pair. The quality wasn't really as good, but so anywhere from about 50 cents to $1.70 in the 1800s.
Because you mentioned about the silver, right? Because there was coin silver, and then I think the other word was a P, like point silver, and then
pure
coin. You had pure coin and coin silver, and those were made out of almost 90% silver. And then there was
That's
a different
correct.
And there was a different alloy. But then they came up with German silver.
That's right.
So how did German silver come about?
Well, they were looking throughout the 1800s, from the early 1800s, as spectacle development progressed towards the 1900s. They were always looking to make spectacles less expensive. And they were working from, let's say, early 1800s. Spectacle makers would make one pair of spectacles at a time. So they may spend a day to make one pair of spectacles. But as we approach maybe 1860, we start to see some signs of mass production. And the mass production was to make more spectacles, make them more quickly, more cheaply. So someone, a chemist, a German chemist, came up with what we call German silver. And it was a combination or an alloy of copper, zinc, and nickel. It was very durable. It looked like silver, and it was very popular. And some unscrupulous spectacle sellers would try to point it off as actual silver, but coin silver was very popular at the time. And the reason was it was less expensive.
And did that become the standard at some point through the 1800s, German silver, or were there manufacturers out there making glasses out of different materials?
Oh, they were still making glasses out of steel, blued steel, brass, coin silver. As we get later into the 1800s, then they started to use more alloys. Bausch and Lomb developed a hard rubber pince-nez style frame. So no, coin silver was just one of the. I'm sorry, German silver was just one of the many materials that was available, but it was varied.
So let's talk then about the eyeglasses themselves. Because if you really look at glasses that were made in the 1800s, and here we are in the 2000s, they haven't really changed much. I mean, there's nose pieces and things like that. But when you think about things like the temple design was a lot different than what we have today, because some of them were slide, or they were a hook temple, or they were a folding temple. Can you talk a little bit about the temples and the designs and the changes made?
Yeah. The temples, the first spectacles to actually have temples, there was an English optician by the name of Edward Scarlett, and I believe it was around 1927. He was the first one to actually put temples on spectacles or on eyeglasses. And they were short, and they would just stop just before the ear and press against the temples. And I think part of the reason they were designed that way was a lot of wigs were worn during that time period, so it didn't interfere with the wig. But it wasn't long before the temples were lengthened so that they would go over the ear. And the slide temples were very popular in America from around 1835 through 1900. And the advantage was there was a one-size-fits-all temple. And then they can be retracted and put into a much smaller, compact storage case. So they were very popular. And they came in different thicknesses. And in the earlier 1800s, they were bulkier and thicker and heavier. And then as time progressed, they became thinner and lighter. And then there was a period of time where the women would complain that the slide temples would catch in her hair. So then the optical manufacturers started making what they called a lady's temple. And basically it's just a one-piece long straight temple, similar to what we wear today. And they were so popular that they started to actually use them for men's frames too, because they were easy to take off and easy to take on. And they had different style temples. In addition to the slide temple, they had what they called a double hinged temple, and the temple would fold in half and then fold again against the front of the frame. So that again would allow the frame to fit in a more compact case. And they did the same thing. They had a turn pin style temple, which was really two pieces riveted at the joint where they can fold over one another and be more compact. But it wasn't until about actually around 1871 or so, there was a patent for a curl temple with spring steel, and it curled around your ear. And the advantage to these was they stayed on very well, but they were also very painful to wear. And it wasn't not even 10 years before they improved upon it. And they made what we call today a cable temple. It's thicker and there's a solid core and wires wrapped around it, but that's still in use today. So they had different style temples, wore different style glasses, and those changed like the eyeglasses themselves over the 1800s.
There were changes made in the frames. there were ovals, or actually, what was popular during the Civil War? I think it was like a very small frame.
All of the frames made during, well, I say pre-1900, but first of all, they were all unisex. And due to the lens technology, the lenses could only be ground to a certain size. So the frames were made to work, to work with the size of the lenses that were available. They were much smaller. Also, what happened was during the Civil War, the average male was about 135 pounds and 5'6". So people were much smaller back then.
But the frame,
so anyway.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So when people wore these glasses, which were very small, it would give them a certain look. So what we tried to do is to capture that look. But people are larger today. It's hard to find a reenactor who's 5'6" and 135 pounds and 26 years old. So what we did was we have a few different sizes. So for larger people, you can wear a larger frame, and it still gives you that period correct look. But at the same time, the larger lenses frame sizes will accommodate modern lenses. So if you wear a bifocal or a progressive lens or whatever, you can get to a larger size and still be able to do that, have proper vision while you're wearing a period correct frame. But back in the 1800s, yes, the sizes were much smaller.
But there were also frames that had side pieces, like the lenses were on the sides and then the glasses were in the front. And it was almost like a modern day, like a protection, like a goggle. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, it was sort of a precursor to our what we would call a wraparound frame today. They had it was 4 lens spectacles. Had your 2 normal lenses, and then hinged at the outside edge of each lens was another lens that would fold out, and it would fold out along your temple, and that would give you protection from the side as well as the front. And often these can be used for, you can have in the front lens, you could have your distance prescription. Then in the side lens, you can have the reading edition where when you folded the lenses in against each other, you can convert your glasses to a reading glass. Or it could have just been a colored lens on the side that was, desert dust, a colored lens on the side that was, colored flat glass, and when that was folded over your, let's say, distance prescription, then all of a sudden you had a sunglass. So they had a lot of different uses, and they were very popular. And today on the used market, they seem to fetch more money than the original 2 lens styles.
So as eyeglasses are progressing through the 1800s, color lenses come about, and I love the look. Like, I see people wearing vintage glasses and they're in yellow lenses or blue lenses. Can you talk about the colors of the lenses? Because were there values to having a blue lens or a yellow lens, or I think there was a green lens, or were there different colors? What was the value to having different colored lenses?
Well, during the Civil War, the most popular colors available were green, blue, and neutral gray. And often it was referred to as London smoke. And any of these colors came in a range of density from very light to very dark. There were about 7 different stages available at the time. So depending on your needs, you can get a medium gray lens, or you can get a dark gray lens, or you can get a light gray lens. And they were all designed to cut glare, to work as a modern sunglass. So different opticians had different preferences based on nothing scientific, but mostly just their own opinions, where some felt green was better than blue, others felt blue were better than green, but there's nothing scientific about different color lenses used for different purposes, except maybe for iron smelters or blacksmith who wore a very dark lens to protect their eyes from that bright glare. But other than that, it was just personal preference.
Because I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, there is a story that if you wore green lenses during the Civil War, it meant you had syphilis. But actually, colored glass lenses were worn the same way we use sunglasses today, just to protect from glare and light. And there was no specific colors designed for specific purposes. And there could have been maybe 24 different eye infirmities that would cause sensitivity to light, and then people would wear these glasses just for protection. The only difference is they were called protective spectacles. Today, we use the term sunglasses, but sunglasses is really a modern term, and it didn't really come about till after 1900. So a lot of people say, well, they didn't have sunglasses back then. Well, they did. They just called them protective spectacles.
As the 1800 progressed, though, into the 1870s, 1880s, did they standard the color? Did they say, listen, the London gray or the London fog, whatever that was, that's going to be the standard? Or did the colors still continue on through the 1800s into the 1900s?
No, there was no standard. The colors continued on. Actually, after, I think it was around 1872, we started to see some orange-colored lenses and deep amber, dark amber-colored lenses, almost like a brownish lens. And then when we get into the 1890s, we see pink lenses. So, if anything, the color palette expanded as we progressed through the 1800s.
And if you're wondering who we're talking to, this is Tom Valenza. Tom is the owner of historiceyewearcompany.com. Again, that's historiceyewearcompany.com. And you can find everything that you need, especially if you're a reenactor or somebody who is doing like reenactments. This is the man and the company that you're going to want to see, because so many people spend thousands of dollars on their clothing and the belts and the shoes and the hat, and then they forget about the eyewear. And that almost becomes a second, almost like it's forgotten about, because you wear your standard glasses and it doesn't complete the whole uniform. And so if you really want to complete your whole uniform, whether you're a Civil War reenactor or somebody who likes dressing an 1800s period piece, you really want to get a hold of Tom, and you can do so at historiceyewearcompany.com. There is discussion about temples and the different types of nose pieces, all the way to the saddle bridge, which I think you wrote that the saddle bridge became pretty standard in the late 1800s. What were some of the different temples that, as from the Civil War all the way out, that progressed through eyewear?
Okay. Yeah, the saddle bridge, yeah, it was about 1875 when we first see a saddle bridge. But now you asked about temples, different temples?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the temples we had, there were loop slide temples, and they were different configurations. We had a band slide temples. In the earlier 1800s, we had what they would call a broad slide temple. Again, these are all retractable, so they would fit in smaller cases. And to modern collectors today refer to the broadside often as a pin and slot temple. It's pretty clear if you actually see a picture of it what it looked like, you know. And like I mentioned before, there were turn pin temples, and then there were the curl temples, which developed into the cable temples. And then now I don't know if you were one, but then also as far as the bridges, different bridge sizes, bridge types. You mentioned the saddle bridge,
right?
That was very popular from about 1875, and through the I would think through the 1940s easily.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they also had what we would call a crank bridge. It sort of looked like a crank handle or an English style nose piece. And then there was a C bridge. There were different styles, different manufacturers tried different things, and it all affected the way that the spectacles looked, at the time of they were manufactured. K-bridge spectacles were really popular, and a lot of the blued steel frames were made with what we call a K-bridge. If you look at our article, there's some illustrations of it. And they were used with a type of lens called coquille. Coquille lenses were almost like what would you call it? A glass over a watch. Had like a large curvature to it, a deep curvature, and these were worn often by the soldiers in the Civil War. They came with blue lenses and gray lenses, and they were basically just a sunglass for the soldiers. Wow. But where am I? So go on, Mike.
Oh no, I'm listening. I'm listening to you. I don't mind. Ramble away. That's the way I learn, and I don't know about other people, but I learn by listening to people. When you made note in your article about lens cases. Today we get glasses. We go to a store. We get reading glasses, or we go to our optician or optometrist, and we get our glasses, and there's a lens case that comes with it, and sometimes it's just a little fabric that just pushes in a little pouch, and that's it. But during the 1800s, glass cases were very ornate, and they were actually beautiful.
Yes, they definitely
Can you go through that?
Sure. Well, actually, technically, we would refer to them as spectacle cases, but whatever the price of spectacles at the time, you wanted to protect them, so cases were sold with these spectacles, and this was a way to protect your spectacles when you weren't wearing them. Kept the lenses from scratching, and it offered some protection if they were dropped. And many of them during the 1800s were made of pressed paper, and then they were covered with a Moroccan leather, and the leather could be in nice shades of red or brown or black. And there were some embroidered cloth cases available, and some were handmade wooden boxes where the top would slip off, the spectacles can be put in, and then the top could be put back on. And then very, very popular during the Civil War were what we call Parker cases. They were just tin punched out cases, and they typically have some type of a material lining on the bottom so that when the frame and glasses were in the case and they were moved around, they didn't get scratched so easily. But cases were also made of German silver, and most of these were metal flip-top cases where when they closed, it was just friction that would hold them closed. Typically, they didn't have any latches on them. And they could be made of real silver if you had the money and wanted to spend it on a case, or just the tin. And they were very popular. And the cases, just like eyeglasses, cases would be used and reused. There wasn't anything fashionable about them. So you could have a pair of eyeglasses, and when the time came just to replace the lenses, and you wear the same frame and use the same eyeglass case for years. But there were, I don't know, I'd have to venture to say there were dozens and dozens of different styles available, all dependent on the manufacturer and what they felt they wanted to offer.
Well, we got about 20 minutes left. It goes by fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let's talk about you. And let's speed forward up to 2022. Somebody is getting an outfit. They're putting together their uniform. They're putting together their Western period piece. Maybe they like going down to Tombstone as a reenactor, or up to Deadwood or to Prescott or something, and they like to do reenactments, and they see your website, or somebody is like, hey, I want glasses to look the period piece. What's the process? Like, what's the process? Do they travel to see you? Or do they do everything over the phone? Or do they do a Zoom call? What's the process? Let's say Mike wants to get something to be period piece, and he literally, and Mike would say to you, because I know me, Tom, I don't have a clue on what I'm doing, but I know what I want. What do I do?
Okay. Typically, you can order online, or you can order over the phone, because a lot of people have questions, and a lot of our customers, surprisingly, don't have computers. So they really have no information other than what they see in True West or Cowboys and Indians in the ads. So what we do, first of all, is look for the time period that you're trying to represent. Okay, if it's the Civil War or the Old West, the way the glasses were manufactured, the same glasses were worn through both those time periods. So the next thing we look at is your physical size. If you're a large person, I'm about 5'10", 205 pounds. I have the larger styles on our website will probably fit you better, give you that better look. If you're my wife, let's say 5'4" and 120 pounds, then some of the smaller styles work better. So we have on the website, we have a spectacle size reference page. If you print it out, and there's a little ruler measurement on the bottom. If that measures 1 inch, these will be the exact size of the spectacles. So you can hold your existing eyeglasses over them to get an idea. Some of our customers actually go through the trouble of cutting it out just to see what the size looks like. But so you have to decide on the period, then you decide on the size. There's not like a lot of choices. And even our larger sizes are smaller than any modern eyeglass would be, because they were worn smaller back in the 1800s. And then from there, you decide on the color. If you're a Civil War grunt, blued steel would probably work for you, because it was the least expensive frame you can buy at the time. Now, if you're an officer during the Civil War, then maybe you'd want a coin silver look. So, there's a few things to consider, but overall, just a few questions, and we can figure out what might work for you. And then what happens is, when you get the frame, if for any reason it doesn't work for you, we can either switch it out for something else, or I'd give customers a refund. They would pay the postage, but I'd refund them the money for the frame. So, it seems like it could be a difficult process, but it's not. Just the best thing is, just to call, and we can discuss it and go from there.
Do people send you photos of, like, this is my outfit, and they'll do a selfie, or they'll have someone take a photo and say, this is the look I'm looking to achieve? Will sometimes people say, I really like this glass, and you'll be like, wrong period, wrong part of history. That lens is for 1810 and not 1880.
Yes, that does happen. But typically, most of the photos I get are actually after they have their spectacles.
Oh, gotcha.
and they're in their outfits. But there are questions. A lot of people think wearing during the not Civil War, but like the Old West time period, 1865 through, let's say, 1890, and they're wearing round spectacles, and round spectacles were just not available during that time period. So when they tell me I want round spectacles, I'll tell you, well, if you're portraying an Old West character and you want round spectacles, they didn't have them. You really should be wearing an oval spectacle.
Is it difficult? Going to be a weird question. Is it difficult to go to the movies or watch a movie from home, and it's a period? You're laughing already. It's a period piece. during that period of the 1800s, do you look at them and look at your wife and go, oh my God, they got the wrong glasses. I can't even watch it any longer.
I can't tell you how often that happens with Tarantino movies. I'm like, oh my God, what is this guy doing? He doesn't care. He's just looking for a certain look. But oh yeah, that happens often. As a matter of fact, my friend Alan, the fellow that we wrote the article together, he's a researcher and he's an author, and he is way into this. And he wanted to start a little online thing where we look at these movies, and wherever there's incorrect spectacles for the time, we put it up on the website or whatever, and say that they only missed by 400 years or something like that. But I didn't think that was such a good idea. We don't want to offend anybody. All we can do is try to put some information out there and hope they read it. And I do find that people have a tendency not to read. We try to put as much information as we can on the website, but people just look at the ad and call up and overlook the website or whatever. But yes, all the time. As a matter of fact, what's really nice is once in a while now, initially, our market was Civil War actors and reenactors, Old West actors and reenactors. And then we found that we were getting some professional Santas and people who were just into this whole Victorian era and some steampunkers. So that was really nice. But then we started getting calls from TV studios and movie studios. And one day we see Colin Firth. There's a Showtime show, The Nick, wearing our spectacles. And then on Apple TV, Dickinson and Me, they're wearing our spectacles. And there's a new Peter Pan and Wendy, and they're wearing our spectacles. And then, of course, it's period incorrect, but Hamilton, the Broadway show, God, we got a call from them, and they needed something. And it's less historically accurate, but more for effect. So we've been supplying them with spectacles since they were off Broadway. Wow. And so that's nice. So yeah, when I see the wrong spectacles, I cringe. But when I do see the correct spectacles, even if they're not ours, a lot of times these costume designers will find original antique pieces, and they just work so beautifully. It's really nice.
Well, this is Tom. We're talking to Tom Valenza, and he owns, along with his wife, the historiceyewearcompany.com. If you want to get a hold of Tom, that's really the best way. I'm not going to give his phone number out, but it really is the best way. That's honestly how I did it, because I went to the website and it was a contact me, and I put some information down and Tom contacted me. And that's really the best way. So if you're a period piece actor during the 1800s and you really want the complete authentic look, like you've already spent thousands of dollars to look in clothing and hats and buttons and everything, you really should finish off the look and give yourself, especially if you're an eyewear person who wears spectacles or glasses, that really is the best way, is to complete it, is to go to historiceyewearcompany.com. If you wanted more, again, if you wanted to see the article that we basically have been following along, honestly, by accident, I was reading yesterday. It takes me about 2 to 3 weeks to do one podcast, even though I do them almost every week. The research and the reading overlaps. And I got down to the end and I looked at the very last page last night and I was like, oh my God, there's Tom's name. Like, I didn't even know that the article I was reading was going to be the person that I was interviewing. It's kind of funny, but there is so much information packed in it. So, don't just use the website, but just don't use the podcast. Dig a little deeper, because there is pictures and there are some wonderful photography, Civil War and Old West photography, and including a picture of Abraham Lincoln's spectacles that he wore the night he was shot at Ford's Theater. He's got a picture of that in this article. It's really an amazing piece. And again, if you go to historiceyewear.com and type in, actually on the internet, let me get back to it. I know, sorry for the ruffling of papers. It's called History on Your Face, Common Spectacle Styles Before, During, and After the Civil War. Again, that's type in your search queue, History on Your Face, common spectacles styles before, during, and after the Civil War. If you just type in the words history on your face, you'll see maybe one or two links down, and then you'll see the historiceyewearcompany.com. That's where you tap on that. It'll take you to this article, and I think it's like 19 pages or 20 pages, and you definitely want to read it and go back on it, especially if you want to really finish off that period piece that you're wearing from the 1800s, because man, it stands out. Anything you want to add before we go?
Yeah, as far as that article, it's a PDF. You can pull it up on the website as a PDF and print it out.
That's exactly what I did.
And hand it out to your friends.
As Christmas
primary
presents.
source information, so it's not, it's not, I have a friend whose cousin knew a guy whose uncle told me this and he heard it from, it's print it out, spread the word. The more people know, the better off we all are.
Yeah, I didn't even think I made a joke as a Christmas present, but then you actually said that's a great thing. Print it out and then give it to people. And if somebody says, I'm looking to complete my outfit. Oh, the greatest thing to say is, I got a guy. And that is really the best thing. So again, this is Tom at historiceyewearcompany.com. Of course, I want to thank the folks at the Tombstone Epitaph. My good friend, Mark Boardman, he's a pastor. He's been super busy this week with some prayers and stuff. But if you want to know more about what Mark's doing, you can do so by becoming a subscriber to the Tombstone Epitaph. And that is at tombstoneepitaph.com. Of course, I also want to urge you to join the Wild West History Association. Now, their memberships are about $75 a year. If you round up to, let's just for mathematical purposes, we'll say $80 because I'm horrible at math. That means you're getting a book delivered to your door, 4 books a year. That's how many times the journal comes out. And it's basically a book for $20, and that includes shipping and handling. That is a great deal. And then you get other things, including the roundup, and you get special events and things you can do and places to go. It's really a fantastic way to get involved in Western history. Of course, you can also do, since Tom is advertising, a shout out to Bob Bosbell, who we've had on a podcast a couple of times, and he's the owner of True West Magazine, and you can find True West Magazine at truewestmagazine.com. As always, I appreciate you guys. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button and set notifications because I'm putting podcasts out almost weekly. If you're on Apple iTunes and Spotify, give me a like and a review. That helps with distribution, and I appreciate you guys a bunch. So until I can't even say it. Until next time.